Jean-Paul Valley is Azrael, the man who took the mantle of Batman during the Knightfall storyline, a character created specifically to become a replacement for Batman, a character designed to fail in that role. In this video we take a look at the origin story of Azrael in his very first appearance, and we analyze the many reasons why Azrael was always going to be the worst Batman. Azrael first appeared in 1992 on a 4-issue miniseries called Batman, Sword of Azrael. The purpose of this series was to introduce a new character to the Batman mythos, a character who would replace Batman. However, taking a look at this story, it's obvious that this character could never succeed. The creative team of the series was stellar. It was written by Denny O'Neil, the legendary Batman writer who was also the Batman editor at the time. The art was done by Joe Quesada and Kevin Nolan, two of the finest artists in modern times, and the editor was Archie Goodwin, another excellent creator. The first issue opens with Azrael, a mysterious figure wearing armor similar to the Knights Templar. Wielding a fiery sword, he intends to use it against another man, to punish him for his transgressions. However, Azrael is brutally shot with a powerful firearm. The scene becomes a complete bloodbath when Azrael strikes with his sword at the face of his aggressor before jumping off the building and escaping from danger. The story's introduction creates an instant connection between Azrael and extreme violence, a connection that will only be reinforced throughout the whole series. A connection that is completely at odds with the principles of Batman. Azrael is deadly wounded, and he barely makes it to the home of a young man who recognizes the dying knight as his father. The way this moment is written and illustrated is a great metaphor, as it illustrates the idea of violence that comes knocking at the door of a young, innocent man. This is Jean-Paul Valley, but his name is not revealed at this moment of the story, and his identity remains a mystery. All we know at this point is that before dying, Azrael gives the young man some instructions. Following these instructions, the young man is thrown into a situation that will change his life forever. He learns that his father was a member of a secret organization called the Order of Saint Dumas, a sect similar to the Templars, and that Azrael was the enforcer for this religious group. He is taken to Switzerland to be inducted in the order as part of the ritual, because the mantle of Azrael is passed on by each generation. He learns that his father implanted subliminal conditioning in his mind since childhood, and that this conditioning will allow him to become the new Azrael. His mentor is a dwarf called Nomos, who triggers the subliminal conditioning and activates the system, the mechanism by which the young, pacifist man becomes a perfectly trained fighting machine. Jean-Paul's normal personality disappears when the system is triggered and Azrael takes over his body. The system breaks the minds and personalities of the men who become Azrael, and that sounds less than ideal for someone who intends to become Batman. Speaking of the Dark Knight, the strange developments involving Azrael in Gotham have drawn the attention of Batman. The case of the vanishing angels and sudden death is a mystery that intrigues even the world's greatest detective. The Batman segments of this first issue are extraordinary, as they showcase the incredibly effective nature of Batman's detective side. Batman investigates, deduces and finds clues about the case, which leads him to find out about the Order of Saint Dumas and the man who killed the first Azrael, an international mobster called Carlton Leha. To learn more about the Order of Saint Dumas, Batman is assisted by Oracle in her first significant appearance in the Batman comics. The information provided by Oracle leads Batman to Switzerland, which is a common trope used by the great Denny O'Neil to take Batman out of Gotham. Switzerland becomes the place where Batman, Azrael and Leha all come together and are linked by violence. Leha tries to blow up the place where Azrael and Nomos are training, and Bruce Wayne arrives in time to witness the attack along with Alfred. After the incident, Batman and Alfred explore the area when they are attacked by Azrael and Nomos, who survive the explosion in an underground shelter. They drive a hovercraft, and Azrael jumps to fight Batman. The Dark Knight proves to be superior to Azrael, who can't win the combat, not even with his flaming sword, as Batman disarms him easily. Nonetheless, Azrael is able to escape thanks to Nomos, who uses the hovercraft against Batman. It all seems to indicate that Azrael is no match for Batman when the Dark Knight is in his prime. As a result of this defeat, Azrael upgrades his costume and also his weapons. He is given a new armor, which is able to create flaming swords from his gauntlets and use them as projectiles. This development plants the seeds of an important character trait of Azrael. Over the course of his history, Azrael will be defined by the constant evolution of his combat outfits. These upgrades will become synonymous with the character of Azrael later on, and especially in the Knightfall saga, and it's fascinating to see it being implemented in his very first appearance. This character trait, however, is also at odds with Batman, who doesn't rely on his outfit to be an effective crime fighter. Batman uses his suit to terrorize criminals, while Azrael improves his suit to brutalize them, which is why he was always doomed to fail as Batman. However, one of the most important aspects that contrast the difference between Batman and Azrael is when Nomos tells John Paul that Azrael does not protect, Azrael avenges. That is the core concept of the character of Azrael, and the most radical difference to Batman. The Dark Knight is the guardian of Gotham, protecting innocents from evil. Azrael is an avenger who punishes evil without thought or care for others. Definitely not the traits that would make an effective Batman. The second chapter of the series ends when Jean Paul is attacked by Leah and shot almost to death. I find this panel particularly interesting as we see Jean Paul holding the Azrael armor inside a green bag. This is eerily similar to a previous Denny O'Neil story, in which a green bag represented the burden that Batman has to carry. Maybe there is an intentional connection, as Azrael definitely becomes the burden that Jean Paul has to carry. Talking about the differences and similarities between Batman and Azrael is quite exciting, but I overlooked an important part of the story, and that is the transformation of the character of Leah. During this second issue, Leah is somehow possessed by a demon called Bees, an enemy of the Order of Saint Dumas. Leah becomes the enforcer of Bees, and the new objective of the story is to stop him from killing members of the Order. This would have been an interesting storytelling twist, except that it is really badly executed. The transformation comes out of nowhere, and you can't really understand what is happening or why. Leah becomes a narrative tool to drive the story forwards, rather than an active antagonist with agency or real tangible motivations. He just becomes the crazy dangerous enemy of the story, and it's the weakest element of this whole series. The moment when Leah shoots Jean Paul and he falls through a window is sort of poetic, as this is the same way that Jean Paul's father was killed by Leah at the beginning of the story. Bruce and Alfred witness the event, and Bruce goes after Leah without changing into Batman. This is another weird choice that is not effectively explained and feels completely out of character. Nevertheless, it's clear that it was intentional, as the writing is very self-aware, and even Bruce acknowledges the fact that he's doing things out of character. And so Bruce chases down Leah, but the bad guy gets the jump on him and Bruce is kidnapped. Leah then takes him to the back of an ambulance and Bruce tries to escape without success. I still think this whole encounter was very strange, making Bruce act conveniently reckless. On the plus side, we see the strong side of Bruce's mind. When Leah uses drugs and torture to get the secrets out of him, Bruce goes into a mental lockdown, which prevents him from revealing any valuable information, which I think is a fascinating trait of the character. With Bruce kidnapped, Alfred is forced to team up with Nomos and Azrael. They work together to track down Leah, and Jean Paul proves that he has the ability to be a detective, so long as he doesn't transform into Azrael. He makes some great deductions, but Nomos insists that, unlike Batman, Azrael does not think. He only punishes. This becomes evident when they finally track down Liha and they go to stop him. First, they try to reach him without causing an incident, but when they are denied, Azrael goes into action, and this leads into the fourth and final chapter of the story. This fourth issue of the miniseries contains all the evidence that Azrael was the worst possible candidate to become Batman. Azrael goes into action, attacking the security team that prevented him from reaching Liha. However, instead of neutralizing them in a safely manner, Azrael brutally slaughters them. He uses his flaming swords as projectiles to impale and burn his opponents. The scene rapidly escalates into a bloodbath, and Alfred is completely in shock. Nomos explains that this is what Azrael does, that Azrael is not decent, that he is not humane, that he is the instrument of righteous cruelty, and that in his eyes, no one is innocent. Someone with these values should never be Batman. However, because it is the system that makes Azrael, Jean-Paul is given the benefit of the doubt, as once he regains his consciousness, he doesn't act like Azrael. After the massacre, Liha escapes once again and travels to America, holding Bruce Wayne prisoner. Bruce tries to play mind games with Liha, delivering some of the most self-aware dialogue, which makes for a fascinating characterization. As Liha gets ready to kill Bruce, Azrael arrives to the place and the final confrontation begins. Azrael is superior, but Liha is ruthless. The whole place is consumed by fire during the fight, and Liha is taken by the flames. Azrael has accomplished his mission, but the whole place is burning, and Bruce is still trapped. Nomos reminds Azrael that he doesn't rescue, that he only avenges, and that they need to leave now. However, Azrael refuses. He goes into the fire and helps Bruce out of the danger. Bruce is weak and tells Azrael to go on without him, which is very ominous considering what will happen in the future. However, Azrael beats the system and he saves Bruce Wayne, taking him out of the burning place. In other words, Azrael saves Batman, foreshadowing the events of Knightfall. Nomos is furious. Azrael has disgraced his name as the Angel of Vengeance, but Jean-Paul removes his helmet and tells him that he is not an angel, that he is a man, and for the first time in the story, he says his name. I think that keeping his name a secret is a fascinating storytelling device, as it illustrates the fact that after all, the man behind Azrael has an identity of his own. This moment works as a catharsis for the character, who finally takes control of his life after being tossed around and manipulated by almost everyone. This moment represents Jean-Paul overcoming the system, which means there is still hope for him. He is a peaceful person, but the system makes him a very dangerous and unstable character. Azrael is a perfect killing machine, which is contrary to the character of Batman, and that is the whole point of the character. Batman Sword of Azrael is the introduction of a new character to the Batman mythos. An enigmatic character is presented to the readers, and the story provides all the information to understand how and why Knightfall happened. Looking back at this story, is certainly clear the intentions they had when they created Azrael. The clues were there all along, and reading this story within the bigger context, one can't help but realize that it all makes sense. This miniseries is far from being a good, satisfying story. It is actually rather disappointing and anticlimactic. The writing was sort of forced at some points, especially with characters like Liha, whose role as an antagonist is weak, and Nomos, who is there only to deliver exposition. The story has some good bits here and there, like the characterization of Bruce Wayne, his dynamics with Alfred, and his detective side. The art of Joe Quesada enhances the violent nature of Azrael, especially in the covers, all of which feature blood and fire. The covers also feature the symbols of a broken Batman, which foreshadows the events of Knightfall very directly. Sword of Azrael may not be a good standalone story, but as the first chapter in a grand storyline, it's quite fitting, opening great storytelling possibilities within the Batman universe, and who better to do that than the best Batman writer? In order to create a character whose values, principles and ideals are the exact opposite of Batman, you need a writer that understands Batman better than anyone else. Denny O'Neil is that writer, and rightfully, he was in charge of creating Azrael, the perfect opposite of the Dark Knight. This was the origin of John Paul Valley, a character that was thrown into a situation in which he was doomed to fail. A character that adopts the name of Azrael, a name that in many mythologies is that of the Angel of Death, and that, by definition, is the opposite of Batman. Thanks for watching.